no. Just no. I'm sorry, but no. I don't need this right now. I swear to God, I don't need this right now, okay?
It's bad enough to have to deal with the aggravating adventures of a superhero family, the jewel hunt of a rabbit and a duck, a genius's trip through the Matrix, gang members killing each other, bank robbers robbing banks, a World War II hero that fights a supernatural Nazi division, an island zombie apocalypse, and the delayed adventures of a boy with a giant key who travels to Disney worlds. On top of trying to play my new Xbox One, and games like Rare Replay, State of Decay, Sunset Overdrive, Halo Master Chief Collection, and the list goes on and on and on.
So in short, I really don't want to play this game right now. And besides, it's Halloween, so it's better if I did a horror game anyway. In fact, how about I review a horror game that I actually find to be pretty underrated? Alien Resurrection.
Based on the not-so-popular fourth movie of one of the biggest action horror franchises, Alien Resurrection is one of the many games based on the franchise to have come out. Aside from Resurrection, I only own 3 of these games. Alien Trilogy on PlayStation, which is actually a pretty good Doom clone from the creators of Die Hard Trilogy that happens to be one of the earliest games released in the system. Early enough to where there's actually a long box version of the game, which I sadly don't own since a few years ago I wasn't really willing to spend $30 on it when I can get a Greatest Hits reprint for about $5. I have nothing against the green label, but for some reason, part of me regrets not owning a big box like that. The next game I have is the classic Aliens vs. Predator game on the PC, which admittedly I didn't play for very long, although I've heard pretty good things about it. Then finally, I also have Alien Isolation on the PS4. And it's probably the only game I've played that's a little too tense for me, but great nonetheless.
So how does Alien Resurrection hold up compared to these other games? Well, I'd say pretty well, but let's double check to be sure. Oh. Okay.
The game's story is more or less an adaptation of the movie. I'll be honest to admit that not only is it a weak adaptation of the movie, yeah, I know that's saying a lot, but it's hardly an adaptation at all. There's not that many cutscenes in the game, and even then, they're not even that good since they don't really explain what's going on. The characters act as though they've known each other for some time, even though we've never been formally introduced to them, and there's hardly any explanation as to why you're here and what's going on, other than, aliens kill people, ship falling apart, must escape now. It may sound like I hate the game for this, but honestly, it's on the contrary. Nearly every other aspect of the game is actually pretty damn good. The game is played as a first-person shooter with survival horror elements, with your basic goal being to get to the end of each stage without dying. Before I talk about the gameplay mechanics, I have to say that the game feels really advanced for a PS1 game. The graphics practically push the PS1 to its limits, and they help create a great atmosphere that really fits with this game's horror theme. The game's control scheme is actually similar to that of a modern first-person shooter, which requires you to use the left analog stick for moving and the right analog stick for turning. Believe it or not, shooters with this control scheme were quite rare on the PS1, with the only other games that I know have this control scheme being Medal of Honor, Rainbow Six, and Delta Force. This control scheme actually works really well with the game, since you'll need the extra mobility in order to survive alien attacks, with there even being a way to make a 180-degree turn by pressing R3. I read that some critics complained about the looking controls being too sensitive, but you're able to adjust the sensitivity within the game's options, so it really isn't that much of a problem. Overall, I'd say the game gives off a very good first impression.
So now, let's finally discuss the gameplay. But I've gotta warn you, if you plan to pick this game up for yourself, it's a wee bit difficult.
Don't get me wrong, the overall gameplay is pretty good. It plays like your standard first-person shooter, and has all the good ingredients that make a good shooter. There's a good variety of weapons you can use, there's a good variety of enemies ranging from security guards with guns to the classic xenomorph warriors, and there's a good emphasis on exploration in order to find items you need or scavenge for supplies. The latter is especially apparent with this game's survival horror elements, because ammo isn't exactly common, and you're going to want to save up your medkits, because the game admittedly is quite difficult. Even on easy mode, the game will kick your ass with xenomorphs that can come out of vents, the ceiling, or even just plain darkness to surprise attack you. There can be facehuggers which can jump and impregnate you with a chest burster, putting you on a time limit to find and use what the game calls an auto-dock unit to remove the chest burster before it kills you instantly. There's some elements of the ship that can turn against you, ranging from Gatling turrets that shoot anything that moves to ruptured steam pipes. Even the occasional human enemies you encounter aren't a pushover, since they try to evade your attacks and gang up on you instead of just acting like brain-dead idiots seen in some other first-person shooters. The bottom line, if you play recklessly, you're going to die. A lot. And given that this game utilizes save points in a similar fashion to other survival horror games, expect to repeat large sections of this game every time you die. Can the experience be frustrating? Well, just like every other hard game, of course it can. But, like all the good hard games out there is a learning curve to the game that doesn't make it feel cheap. Nearly every time you die, you feel as though it was your own fault in some way. Sometimes you might think, should I really have rushed through that hallway where aliens could have been waiting for me? Should I have aimed better at that charging xenomorph instead of just flailing around in a panic? Or should I stop listening to music so I could hear approaching enemies better? Because yes, in order to properly experience this game, you need to be sitting in a dark room with as little noise as possible. Yeah, that notice at the beginning wasn't just a recommendation, it was a strong suggestion. Because the game has really dark lighting that requires you to frequently have a flashlight on standby. You'll also need to listen closely for any sounds that might be coming from enemies, because it's the only way you can track them until you get a hold of a motion tracker later in the game. This is the kind of game that requires you to take in its atmosphere in order to be able to enjoy it fully. But you know what? It works really well. There's little in the way of music, and given the overall darkness of the game, as well as the fact that enemies can surprise you from practically anywhere, I feel this game sets a great unsettling atmosphere that fits perfectly with the Alien license. Sure, we now have a better version of this with Alien Isolation, but for a PS1 game in the year 2000, I think this game did a really good job setting that tone.
So what was with the response from critics? Guess we're gonna have to find a few flaws to find out.
Honestly, I can't really think of major flaws of the game, although there are several minor things to point out. For one thing, the frame rate tends to drop when there's a lot of action on the screen. Given how the game is already pushing the limits of the PS1, this is kind of a no-brainer though, and I've never experienced a drop that made the game outright unplayable, so honestly, the only ones who should be complaining are the 60 frames per second elitists. Another thing that can be a bit annoying is climbing ladders. I don't know if I'm just doing it wrong, but it feels like some of the ladders are positioned awkwardly to the point where I feel like I'll fall and take damage if I don't slowly approach the ladder. But once again, this isn't that big of an issue, since ladders that aren't positioned over a square-shaped hole aren't that common. But aside from that, I really can't complain about anything. Sure, you would think I would complain about the difficulty, but given that it's not cheap like games such as Alendar and Die Hard Vendetta, it's actually something I give the game praise for. Since let's be honest, good survival horror games should be hard. Because that's what increases the tension, that's what helps you stay on your guard, and that's what makes the experience more rewarding when you finally manage to come out alive. Making a hard game good is not about handicapping the player in every way possible or heavily punishing them for unforeseen mistakes that should have been minor. It's about giving the player all the tools they need to get through the game and designing the game in a way that allows them to get better the more they play. And this is the kind of game Alien Resurrection is, and while it's definitely not a masterpiece or even that original, it's still a fun and surprisingly scary survival horror experience that any fan of the Alien franchise can enjoy. And funny enough, I'm giving praise to the difficulty of a game developed by Argonaut Games, who developed Aladdin and Nazira's Revenge, a platformer that was hard because of an uncooperative camera and unresponsive controls. I guess this goes to show you that just because a developer screwed up once doesn't mean that crap is all they're gonna make.
So what was with the mediocre reviews critics gave this game? Honestly, I really don't know. A better question would be why they gave more praise to this piece of shit right here, because that in itself is scary. I suppose I'll have to find out next month. But for now, let's play some good games while we can.